Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your Hobgoblin host Hunter, and this is Hobby Goblin Studios. This week I'm going to be breaking down conversions and figuring out what it takes to make a unique model that looks exactly the way you want it to. So let's hop on into the build. If you've seen last week's video where I built not one, but two dioramas to celebrate the 35-year anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, then you know that I had a really hard time trying to find a model that would represent Link and Dark Link. I couldn't really find anything that was sold commercially, and the pieces that I found sold by independent artists were pretty scarce. So I took a look and tried to find some free STLs to see if maybe someone could print them for me, but most of those were pretty unimpressive. And then
I was under the impression that they were 28mm scale, and they're a lot closer to 15.
It was at this point that I decided a conversion was going to be necessary. So I went to all my local game stores and looked through their selections of miniatures, and even though there were a lot of D&D things and Warhammer figures, it was pretty hard to find something that wasn't covered in plate armor or have a really long flowy cape. Luckily though, I did have to take a trip out to Detroit to pick up some commission work. And while I was there, I stopped at another game store that I'd never been to, and I found the perfect Pathfinder models to make this conversion happen. The first step in any conversion is to make sure you have all the bits you're gonna need. So I ripped these packages open and started clipping off the shields I was gonna use and removed the bow from the elves. It's important to make sure that everything fits right before you do too much work, so a quick dry fit is in order. I knew I was going to want to paint the Hyrulean shield design onto this shield, but that meant there was a lot of details I was going to have to remove. So I broke out the X-Acto knife, started scraping away, and cleaned it up with some sandpaper. This conversion isn't going to be the most complicated one that you'll see on the internet. After all, once I'm finished with the shield, all I really have to do is glue the hilt of a sword onto the quiver to make it look like a scabbard, and then sculpt some little hats. I've never really done much sculpting before, but I feel it's really easy to start if you're doing something as organic and free-flowing as these long stocking hats. It's also really helpful that I'm doing all of this twice, because whichever one turns out better can be Link, and the less impressive one can be Dark Link. I'm pretty sure he's going to end up being obscured by the resin when I finish this project. So I mixed up some green stuff, which is a 2-part epoxy putty, and I get to work. I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing here, honestly, and I'm mostly just winging it. I couldn't even tell you what's going through my head at the time. Honestly, the only thing I really knew is that it's important to keep your tools wet so they don't stick to the putty as you go. Once I find something that I'm kind of happy with, I leave it to cure overnight. With the modeling finished, it's time to talk about painting. I'm not looking for anything particularly award-winning here, and honestly with all the setbacks that I've had, I'm not looking to spend much time on it at all. There's a few things I wish I would have put a little more effort into, but regardless, I start by giving them a zenithal prime. Then I most mostly apply my base coats with some very thin glazes and Games Workshop contrast paints, so that I really don't have to highlight much of anything later. There is one thing I want to put some time into, and that's the shield. Link has a very iconic Phoenix and Triforce design on his shield, and it's very important to me that I get this right. The key to any freehand design is to work with a color that you can easily cover up if you make a mistake. In this case, both red and yellow get covered pretty easily by the blue. However, if I was painting a black design here, I'd probably go with something more in a medium gray. The reason for this is that you're bound to make a mistake when you're trying to figure out the scaling and placement of your design. And the quicker you can correct that mistake, the quicker you can finish the design. Also, the more layers of paint that you put onto something, the more likely it is to develop a texture, and we don't want that here. It's also a lot easier to trace a line you've already made than it is to paint one without a guide. So you're less likely to make a mistake when you're using the darker, harder to cover color if you're tracing something. You'll notice that I paint the first lines slightly thinner than I want them here, and I'll come back and trace over them once I'm happy with how they look. And definitely don't think I did this all in one try. Don't be afraid of starting over. I had a really hard time trying to get the basic triangle right for the Triforce. You can see me paint over it a few times here, actually. It's well worth painting over something that isn't quite right if you know you can do it better. A wavy or sketchy line is a sure way to wreck your freehand. Just be patient and wait for it to all come together. And then I do it all over again for Dark Lake. The job here isn't the greatest, and I kind of wish I would have put a little more effort into it, but it's also pretty nice to just be able to slap paint on something and call it done. I mean, I could have spent 10 or 20 hours on this thing, but honestly, with all the setbacks I had in this project, I don't know if I would have had the motivation to keep going and finish it. If you don't know what I mean when I say all these setbacks, go ahead and check out last week's video right up here. I really like the way this conversion turned out, and even if the paint job isn't super impressive, I think the main goal here was to get a cool conversion. And when you have a cool conversion that looks like the model that you're trying to make, it doesn't necessarily matter what your paint job looks like. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and if you'd like to support me any further, head on over to hobbygoblinstudios.com, where you can scroll through a gallery of my other works, read a little bit about me and what I do here. You can even contact me about commission work, whether that's miniature painting, diorama or terrain building, or even custom altered trading cards. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, keep on crafting!